channel and we'll bring up the chumash. So, my friends, we're going to learn about tuma and tahara, impurities. And it's actually interesting because I think maybe think about it in thoughts of corona. So the question is, how careful do you need to be? How much could you contaminate and affect another person? There's debates now. Is it 6 feet? Is it 3 feet? What about a metal surface? What about a cloth surface? How long will the sickness stay on the disease, stay on the surface of something? So the question is, how much time is it to contaminate? How much time do you need in order for something to contaminate something else? We're talking spiritual. We're not talking physical. So let me not confuse you by bringing up an example of corona. But just as in corona, we have this discussion of, well, how much, how far is it? That's the conversation we're having today about spiritual things, about what contaminates something or what doesn't contaminate something. It's going to be a very basic class today, very interesting class, I think, and really getting down to the basics of this. It's almost like the cooties. How far could it spread? If one person is impure, can they make another person impure? Well, if you make that person impure, how far could it spread? How many people is it endless? Is there a certain amount of people? Are there certain items, food, vessels? What is it that becomes impure? In today's class, if you listen well, you'll get a very good basic understanding of the laws of impurities and purity. What are the halachas? What are the laws of things becoming impure, and so on. Now, why is it today? Why are we learning about it today? How does it fall into the chumash today? So again, if I understand correctly, here's the overview. We started learning at the end of Exodus about the Jews leaving Egypt. Then they made the golden calf, and then they built the tabernacle. After they built the tabernacle, we started learning about all the sacrifices. So the third book of the Torah started telling us about all the sacrifices, the animals that are brought inside the Mishkan. So that was the first 3 Torah portions. Then we spoke at length yesterday about which animals are kosher and which animals are not kosher, which leads us to today's class, which we're going to discuss which animals make you impure. How do you become impure and not? It's not so relevant today because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. It's okay for things to be impure. God willing, very soon the Beis Hamikdash will be built, and therefore it's imperative for us to know these laws, so we'll know what to do when the Beis Hamikdash is built. Okay, so that's a little bit about what we're going to do today. It's interesting if you look. Depending on the item that it is, it can make things impure here. So stay focused. It's not something that's in regular day life today, but still something very interesting. Verse 33, Pasuk Lamed Gimel, chapter 11. Chol kli cheres. If it's an earthenware vessel, this is the exception to the rule. If it's an earthenware vessel, it has a different status than everything else. If you remember, we actually learned already that earthenware vessels also have different status regarding things that are kosher and non-kosher. Because we said that an earthenware vessel absorbs the item inside it so strongly, you can never get rid of it. You can't kosher an earthenware vessel. You have to smash it and get rid of it. Interestingly enough, there is also an exception regarding impurities with the earthenware vessel, that an earthenware vessel cannot be put in a mikveh and made impure, right? So you want to kosher something, you have to get the non-kosher taste out of it. How do you do that? You put in boiling water. But what about something's impure? How do you make it pure again? It doesn't help to boil out the taste. There's no taste there. It's just impure because something impure touched it. Well, you put it in the mikveh. But if it's an earthenware vessel again, it's no good. You cannot, remember we said in the koshering class, porcelain sinks, cannot kosher them. Also, let's say you have ovens that are made out of like porcelain in the olden days they would have. Today, they're probably more metal. But in those days, the ovens were made out of like our old-fashioned porcelain sinks. Sometimes the sinks you have in the bathroom, but sometimes people in the old-fashioned kitchen sinks they had. If they were earthenware vessel, they would not be able to become impure. The only way making it impure again is by smashing it, destroying it, that it shouldn't be usable. So verse 33, because kli cheres, the exception to the rule, if you have not metal material, not plastic material, you have earthenware material. Asher yipol mehem al toichai, kol asher b'toichai yitmoi v'oisei tisberum. 2 things happen with this earthenware vessel. Number 1, very interesting. If the contaminated item, the impure item, remember what is impure? We've been learning about it. A carcass of an animal, a dead animal. If it was slaughtered, it's still pure if it's kosher. If it wasn't slaughtered, it was shot, you went hunting. The carcass is dead. You didn't use a slaughtering method to use it, or it's a non-kosher animal that was also killed, and you have its carcass. it falls inside your earthenware vessel. You have a large earthenware vessel. You have a piece of, so that you go, whatever you go, you have non-kosher meat. Non-kosher meat is impure. Not just is it not kosher, it's impure. It fell inside your earthenware vessel. Just by it entering the airspace inside your earthenware vessel, that will make your earthenware vessel impure. And guess what will happen? Any other pure item inside the other pure food item inside that earthen vessel will then also become impure. So first of all, it'll make your earthenware vessel impure, and that earthenware vessel will then make the other food inside it impure too, even though the contaminated non-kosher meat that fell inside your earthenware pot didn't touch the kosher meat inside your pot, never touched. So it never made it non-kosher, but it made it impure. So the impure meat fell in to the area, to the air space of the earthenware vessel. It contaminates thereby the earthenware vessel, and then the earthenware vessel will go and contaminate the kosher meat that's inside its earthenware vessel. So that is unique to an earthenware vessel, that it contaminates anything that's inside it. However, the earthenware vessel also is very protected, because if the non-kosher meat fell on the outside of the earthenware vessel, not in the inside inner air space, but on the outside, it touched it, it will become a protective block and not allow anything that's inside it to become impure. So this is unique to earthenware vessel. Anything inside the earthenware vessel in the air space will make everything else impure inside it. Anything that touches the outside of the earthenware vessel, it'll act like a shield and protect it, that the inside shouldn't become impure. And that is starting off with like the exception to the rule, that, and then the earthenware vessel can never be pure again. Even if you stick it in the mikvah 100 times, the mikvah will not make your earthenware vessel pure again. Okay, so that is the way that it works. Verse 34. Any food that fell inside the same earthenware vessel, right, where the impurity was, any food that fell inside it. Now, another rule. He teaches you a lot of rules over here. We're going to learn a bunch of rules now in the basics of impurity in verse 34. Let me read the verse, and then I'll go through the Rashi. I'm going to share with you 7 rules, 7 different rules, and you're going to learn the basics of things that become impure if you stick with me. Okay. So let's do first the verse inside, then we'll go through this really long Rashi. Anything that's food that falls inside the earthenware vessel. Listen to the details. Food falls inside the earthenware vessel. Rule number 2, which we're going to learn in Rashi in a moment, that had water on it beforehand. I'll explain what that means. That liquid went on the food item. Yitma, that food item within the airspace of the earthenware vessel, will now also become impure. And any, not just water, any liquid that you drink, the kol kli that you drink out of any vessel, if it hits the food before it goes into the airspace, Yitma will become impure. Let me explain. If it didn't make sense, it's fine. We're going to learn 7 rules in impurities in this long Rashi that we have over here and give you the basics. Rule number 1, food can become impure. Any food. So let's say a carcass fell on a food, that food will become impure. However, the food cannot become impure if 2 things happen to it. Number 1, if it's still attached to the ground. In Florida, I saw an orange tree. I saw in the golf course where I was, there was just like, it was so cool. I just walked by. You don't see this in Jersey. See orange trees just on a golf course there. If a impure carcass touched the orange when it was attached to the orange tree, it's not impure. It's still connected to the ground. Things that are connected to the ground can't become impure. It can't make mountains impure. The ground cannot become impure, and anything attached to the ground cannot become impure either. However, once the orange is taken off the tree, it could become impure, but not until something happens first, and that is liquid has to go on the orange. For some reason, liquid prepares the item that it could become impure, and it could be any kind of drinking liquid, anything you drink. It could be wine, it could be water, probably apple juice, all the oil, all these things, grape juice, all these things that go on the orange will make it susceptible to now becoming impure, which means that if the orange was attached to the orange tree, something impure touched it, no problem. It's still attached to the ground. It can't become impure. The orange was picked from the orange tree and no liquid ever went on it. No liquid ever went on the orange, and then something impure touched it. It's still pure. Only after it's picked from the tree and then liquid touched it, does it become impure? So now if this orange fell inside the earthenware vessel which had something impure inside it, then the orange could become impure by being inside the earthenware vessel. That is rule number 1. Rule number 2, once the orange has become wet, like I told you, it's a prerequisite, Rashi tells us here, it's a necessity. Even if you dried the orange, too bad, the orange already became wet, already had the liquid on it. It doesn't matter. If you dry, it doesn't have to be wet when it becomes impure. For some reason, it has to go through a process of becoming wet. Once it became wet, from now on, it could always become impure, even if you dry. That's rule number 2, what we learn in the basics to understanding impurity. So number 1, cannot be attached to the ground even. Number 2, it had to become wet once it's attached. Number 3, even if you dried it, I don't care. It was already wet once, and now it's ready to become impure. These are the rules. Imagine learning like Corona. What are the rules and regulations? These are the rules for things becoming impure. Number 4, another rule. Number 3 or number 4, whatever number you want to call it. Any kind of liquid that's like drinkable can make something impure. It doesn't have to be water. Anything that goes on this orange, goes on the fruit, the food, any kind of liquid can make it impure. Number 5, another rule. Let's go through number 5. So this bug, this carcass of a bug, even, right? We learned to certain bugs that fall inside this earthenware vessel makes the earthenware vessel impure, and then the vessel can make the orange that fell inside there impure too. But here we're going to learn something. You know, like how much does Corona, you could ask the question, how many people could it contaminate? We know Corona could contaminate infinite. That person to that person to that person. Maybe there are certain sicknesses that can only move so far, right? So we're going to tell you that with impurity also, it doesn't move actually forever. So for example, let's say you had a big earthenware vessel, right? A big earthenware vessel, and a carcass of a bug which is impure fell inside there. That carcass is the original impurity. The impurity falling into the ear of the earthenware space makes the earthenware vessel now, it's not called original contaminator, but it's called number 1. Number 1, so the earthenware vessel becomes a number 1 contaminator. So the carcass is the original, it's called the father of impurity. That's the term Jewish law uses. And it makes the vessel into the first effect of the original contaminator. We call it a number 1. Now, if the orange fell inside the earthenware vessel, the orange becomes number 2. But what happens if it wasn't an orange that fell? What happens if another cup, someone put a cup inside the earthenware vessel? The cup cannot become impure because the earthenware vessel, being a 1, doesn't have enough power to make another vessel impure. He only has enough power to make food impure. Okay? So if the original carcass of a bug fell on a vessel, that's enough to make the vessel impure. But if the original bug makes the earthenware vessel impure, that earthenware vessel is already weakened. It's not as strong as the original thing that contaminated everything, the original carcass of the bug, and therefore the earthenware vessel can only make food impure. It cannot make vessels impure. So that's rule number 5. I'll recap when we're done, and we'll go through all the rules because it's really important to understand this, to understand the laws of impurity. Rule number 6. I already mentioned rule number 6. Rule number 6 is that it has to, if it's attached to the ground, if the orange is still on the orange tree, it cannot become impure because the ground can't become impure. And by the orange being attached to the orange tree, it's still attached to the ground and cannot become impure. I mentioned that already. Rule number 7. There has to be a minimum egg size in the original contaminator in order to contaminate other things. So there has to be a certain amount of size to it in order to contaminate other things. I believe that is, so let's say you had a dead animal and you got a piece of a dead animal, that piece needs to be at least the egg size. A lot of times they would use the egg size because when you swallow, the maximum a person could swallow is the egg size, and that's considered the necessity in order to contaminate other things. So if it's a tiny little thing that fell inside a pot, inside an earthenware vessel, it wouldn't make let's say the meat you put in, non-kosher meat, fell in, wasn't slaughtered, or kosher meat that wasn't slaughtered fell in, that was non-kosher now, fell into the pot, that wouldn't contaminate everything unless it had enough egg size in order for it to contaminate other things. Now, if it was a bug, I believe the rule would probably be it could still contaminate, even though a bug, so usually less than the egg size because it's the whole bug. So if you have a whole entire bug there, I think that would still be enough in order to contaminate everything else because it has all the legs and the hands and the feet, even though a lot of mosquitoes are let's say, much smaller than the egg size, the carcass of it would still contaminate the earthenware vessel that we had here. So let me recap, okay? 7 rules for the basics of impurity. Rule number 1, what liquid needs to go on the item, the food item, in order for it to become susceptible to becoming impure. If liquid never went on it, water never went on it, it will not become impure. I don't care what impurity touches it. If it never had water, you always kept it on, you were growing a tomato tree in your house, and then something impure touched the tomatoes, and it never had water on it, you never washed it, or so on, the tomatoes will not become impure. It's a way to protect you from it becoming impure. Don't make sure no liquid gets on it. Rule number 2, even if you wash the tomato, once the tomato became impure, you wash it right now, it's dry, I don't care. It had liquid on it once, from now on, it's always susceptible to becoming impure. Rule number 3, it's not just water, it's even if wine somehow got on your tomato, or oil, or any kind of liquid that of the various liquids that a person can drink or so on from a vessel, it's rule number 3, they can also prepare the fruit, the food item for becoming impure. Rule number 4, okay? Earthenware, something become impure from, let's say, the carcass of this bug touched a vessel, that vessel cannot make another vessel impure. It's only strong enough to make food impure. So the original carcass is considered the father of the impurity, the originator of the impurity. The vessel that got contaminated by the father of impurity is now considered number 1. In order to make a number 2, a next step impurity could only be with food. It cannot be other vessels, okay? That's rule number 4. Rule number 5, that a bug, a carcass of a bug that falls inside an earthenware vessel will make that's part of the rule I was just saying, will make the earthenware vessel impure, and that earthenware vessel will thereby try and make the other item pure. Food item will be able to, and a vessel it won't be able to. Rule number 6, if the orange is still attached to the orange tree, it cannot become impure, even if water fell in it. Of course, it rained, and that's how the orange grew. It doesn't matter. That liquid doesn't count to making it impure because it was attached to the ground, and the ground can't become impure. Attached to the tree, which is attached to the ground. And rule number 7, it has to have the minimum of the egg size in order to make other things impure. Otherwise, it cannot make other things impure unless its original complete bug size is altogether a full bug. I believe that will make things impure, even if it's not the size of an egg. Any questions or comments on that before we go on? Yeah, because those are the basics. Ira.
I thought it was, what was it called? The gazayat, the size of an olive, not an egg.
Well, sometimes it's a gazayis, and sometimes it's an egg, depending on what it is. So certain items over here, I believe it has to be an egg size. Yeah.
Okay.
In other words, you're right. There are rules in Jewish law, but you're right. It's required for it to be an olive size, but not here. Depending on the discussion here, we're talking about an item that's the maximum you could eat. And no, the maximum a person could eat is an egg size. We learned it out from the word eating and oichel, and that's how they come up, I believe, the number with it over here. So certain things, like let's say on Yom Kippur, right? You're probably not allowed, shouldn't eat more than an olive size, maybe. But regarding impurities, it's an egg size. I don't know, whatever. I don't want to go through the whole discussion, but there are times it's an olive size and other times it's an egg. And over here, Rashi says an egg. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this basic understanding of impurities before we move on? Okay, let's go on.
Quick question.
Yeah. Yes.
So are we not allowed to wash our vegetables?
You're allowed to wash your vegetables. So you're asking a good question. We're all impure today. We all go to the cemetery. I'm saying, like, is it a problem to be impure? It's not a problem to be impure. It's not a problem to be impure. We're all touching dead mosquitoes all the time, right? Where if you're a Kohen who wants to serve in the temple, or if you wanted to walk on the Temple Mount now, or you was times of the Beis Hamikdash, you wanted to eat the Pesach sacrifice, what would you do? It's very easy to get rid of this impurity. The way to do it is you go to the mikvah, or you put the item, the vessel in the mikvah, besides the earthenware vessel, right? And you have to put your clothes in certain cases, even in the mikvah. I guess they would have a laundry mat, and then they would have like a mikvah mat, you know, where they would put your clothes in, and now you're pure, and now you can eat the Pesach sacrifice. So the times we would really be careful was in the times we'd be eating sacrifices. But today, we're not really worried about this stuff because it doesn't make so much of a difference to us. Okay? So that is Is it a problem to be pure? It's not a problem. Today, it's not really such a problem to be impure because we're not going anywhere where it's such an issue. By the way, many people go to the mikvah every day on a daily basis in order to hit that high level. If you want to hit that high level of impurity, you'll go to the mikvah if you want to hit that high level of impurity. By the way, next week's class, we're going to learn about other times people go to the mikvah. When women have a baby or after women have a period, they go to the mikvah. Or men after they have an emission. So there are going to be other ways we're going to learn how you could become impure, and we want to become pure, and we'll go to the mikvah for that. But these food items is not really, no one's killing mosquitoes today and then having them on their body and then running to the mikvah afterwards, because why? Where are you running to the mikvah for? When before we go to the ohel, for Shabbos, some people, they'll want to go to the mikvah to hit that higher level of purity. Make sense? Gregory, yeah? Okay, let's move along. We're not done yet. We're still going to learn some more of the basics together of the laws of impurity. Verse 35. Any carcass that falls on anything impure will become impure. Any impure carcass that falls on anything will become impure. So tanur, if you have an oven, vikirayim, the olden days, there are two kinds of ovens, very similar to our stove tops today, not ovens, but stoves. Which means they would put the firewood on the inside, and then they would have a hole on top where the smoke would come up like a smoker. And their pots would be on top of the fire underneath it, and it would heat the food inside there. Utats must be smashed because the earthenware vessel cannot become pure. So I guess you don't want to really, earthenware vessel could be a problem. An oven could be a problem. The Rashi is going to tell us it depends what kind of an oven you have. If it's a portable oven, then you got serious problems, because if, I guess, these mosquitoes are dead and they're hitting your oven and there's no solution, there's no way to solve your oven because especially if it's made out of earthenware, then it's always impure. Fine, you can keep on eating impure. It's not an issue, but you can never eat purity out of this oven again, out of the stove. So he says that it's only a problem in a portable oven, because remember I told you before, ground can't become impure. So if the orange is connected to the tree, which is connected to the ground can't become impure. But guess what? If you have a built-in oven that's not a portable oven, a stove, and that's screwed and connected to the ground, you're okay, because anything that's connected to the ground in a very serious way cannot become impure. But here we're talking about portable ovens. I guess like a grill. You have a portable grill, and the grill is let's say made out of earthenware. Your only solution is you have to throw it out. You have to smash that grill and make it that it's not usable, and only then can you maybe re-put it together and use it? Maybe it's possible to use it again, but there's no real solution to the earthenware vessel. There's no solution to it for kashering it, as we discussed in the previous class a few weeks ago, and there's no solution for making it pure again. Yutats to meim heim, the earthenware vessel is tami lechem, and it should be tami to you. Okay, and look what he says. Rashi says if you want to keep this grill that's a portable grill as impure, go ahead. Just whatever meat you make on it, you should know is impure, is going to be impure that you make on that grill. But that's fine, as long as you're okay with being impure. As long as you're not eating the Pesach sacrifice, that's not a problem for you to eat the meat impure. That's fine. You can keep it. It's fine. A Kohen will be a problem if you're serving in the temple. It's fine for you, but you just know any meat, anything you grill on that is not going to become impure. So what do? You put it in the mikveh. What kind of mikveh? In the Rambam, we learned the other day, there's 7 levels. There's 7 different kinds of levels. Achmayin, if you have a spring, you take the grill, not the earthenware vessel, you take everything else, you stick it in the spring, or mikveh, or bar mikveh mayim, or gathering of water, right? The natural, ponds and whatever there are, the stuff that there are, it's pure. Those things are essentially pure, he's saying. Rashi's explaining. They stay pure. They always stay pure. You can't make them impure. These natural spring waters and these natural bodies of water that are in the ground, they are forever pure. Nothing, no matter what falls in them, you're going to throw all these non-kosher animals that are dead, carcasses, they're going to stay pure. And then by you going inside them, they will make you pure again. They can purify you. Those are the mikvahs that we have. Chabad's building a mikvah now. That's exactly what we're building. We're building an unbelievable, there's different levels of purity, maybe not on this level, but again, the mikvah cannot become impure. The 40 saw, I'm not sure about that, and then you go inside it and then you become pure. Yitar v'negem v'nevlas yutzma. However, he says a funny case. And they bring this in the mikveh, the science, sometimes I'll explain to you what it means. So they bring it to show that what happens if you go into the mikveh, you're in the mikveh, something funny, and you're touching a non-kosher dead animal, a carcass of a dead animal, okay, with one hand. So are you pure? You're in the mikveh, but you're touching something impure. What are you? On one hand, you're touching something that makes you impure. It's a funny question. On the other hand, you're in the mikveh that makes you pure. Are you pure or impure? You're impure. Unless you let go of the item and you completely submerge yourself, you're impure. Even though you're kind of have two things going on at once. You're fully in the mikveh and you're touching something impure. What's the difference? Let's say you stick your other hand out and touch another piece of meat. That's not in the mikveh. So now you're on one hand you're touching something impure, and then you're in the mikveh, and then the other hand you're touching something pure. You will make that pure thing impure because you're right now impure, even though you're in the mikveh at the same time. Now, I'll tell you another fact that'll make a difference. The mikveh actually doesn't make you pure right away. We're used to go to the mikveh, become pure right away. No, you still, after going to the mikveh, have to wait till nightfall. You actually are impure till the end of that day. So you go to the mikveh, fine, you've taken care of 50%, but now the next half of it, you have to wait till nightfall. So if you come out of the mikveh and you start touching stuff, you will actually make it impure, even though you went to the mikveh, because you're still impure. So the mikveh will not save you from becoming impure. It's a remedy once you become impure, and that remedy won't finish till you finish the end of the day, but the mikveh will make you impure. It's an interesting fact. So they say, I'll tell you why they have the sign up in the mikveh. I actually went to the mikveh with my kids before I went to the Ohel the other day. So my brother was with me and my two kids. And in the mikveh, they charge $3 to go to the mikveh. You know, there's a shower there. Whoever wants to go to the they have a $3. So how do they make sure you pay? They don't have a guy there the whole time. They have a turnstile, like in the airport, like places. To get through, you have to go through this turnstile. So somebody suggested, I'm not going to say who, that two people go together and then you only pay $3 and you could get, nobody's watching, you could get two people through at one time. So a lot of mikvahs have a sign that if you steal to go to the mikveh, it's like touching a dead carcass and going to the mikveh, you're still impure. That's the joke that they make in life. They're like doing a mitzvah with something with a sin at the same time is like going into the mikveh, but while you're in the mikveh, you're touching something impure. Then the mikveh doesn't help you if you're touching it while it's impure. Right? Anyway, yeah. Ira, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so based on that, how come if you're in the mikveh and you touch something impure, it doesn't make the mikveh impure where they have to refill it?
You can never make the mikveh impure because it's naturally, you can't contaminate the mikveh. That's how the verse starts. The spring and the cistern is always pure. You can't impurify it. It's the source of life. And it'll make you pure. However, if you're touching something impure while you go to the mikveh, it's not going to help. You're going to still be impure. That makes sense. In other words, you can't make the mikveh impure. You can never make the mikveh, the spring can never be made impure. That's the most natural, holiest, kind of impure item that it can never be made impure. But you could be made impure. And if you're going to the mikveh, okay, I'm being made pure, but you're touching something impure at the same time, your impurity didn't go off you. You're at that moment, you're still impure. If you let go of the item and then submerge, you now become pure, but you still have to wait till night. You're still impure till nightfall. So the mikveh won't save you. In other words, just because, like they say, tap that Frito, if you're touching home base, nobody could tag you. It doesn't work like that. If you're in the mikveh, the home base will always be your base. It will always stay pure. But if you're in the mikveh, even if you're in home base, you're in the mikveh, but you touch something impure, that will contaminate you and won't protect you from becoming contaminated. All right, make sense? Okay, kind of, not really. An interesting rule. Okay, let's go on. Verse 36. We did that already. Another thing is anything that's attached to the ground will stay if it's attached to the ground, like an oven attached to the ground, or like the orange attached to the tree, which attached to the ground, they will not become impure. Like this river that's part of the ground, that's part of the ground, it won't become impure. Now he's continuing to teach you the laws that I mentioned before about liquid, that if it's on the tree and it becomes wet while attached to the tree, the liquid won't affect it. It's only when the orange is off the tree, then the liquid falls in it, then will affect it, that it's not going to be able to become impure. Verse 37. If a carcass falls on plants that never became wet, no problem. It cannot make you impure. A carcass cannot make anything that grew impure if it never had water on it. However, verse 38, if water did fall on the item, if the water fell on the fruit, and then the carcass touched it, it is impure, and it can become impure. So once it's picked and the liquid falls in it, it can become impure. Okay, and remember we said water or any other kind of liquid that you could drink from a cup, it makes it impure, and even if you dry it, as Rashi says, it doesn't help you. Once liquid fell on a fruit or vegetable, something that grew, once it's not attached to the ground, it can become impure. Verse 39. Now, so he says, let's talk about a kosher animal. What are kosher animals? You have a kosher cow. It died. It wasn't shechted. If it was slaughtered, no problem. You slaughtered the animal, everything's pure. The animal's pure. If you killed it in a kosher way, the animal's considered pure. But what about if it died? Roadkill, the deers that are on the street that get hit by cars and they get killed, or someone's going hunting, even if it was a kosher animal, but it's dead now. And again, you're impure. That carcass, not shechted, not slaughtered in the ritual way, will become impure. However, here's going to answer a question from yesterday. Yeah, from yesterday, I think. The bones, Rashi says, and the sinews, the hard sinews, and the horns, and the hooves, or the skins, the hide, do not become impure unless they have meat attached to them. These items do not become impure. Only eating things, that the eating part of it becomes impure, only the meat. But the skins and these things, as long as it has clean of any meat, which obviously leather shoes, right? Or fur coats, or someone asked yesterday about the hats that Hasidim wear. Those things, since they have no meat, if I understand this correctly, they do not become impure. So I know Lana asked us yesterday, do hats that Hasidim wear make them impure? No, because it's only the meat of the animals that can make something impure, but not their skin. So you can wear a crocodile handbag and you will not become impure from it, because it's talking about, if I understand correctly, the meat of the animal, the thing you eat, but not the other parts of it, and therefore you're fine. If it has a little bit of meat on it still, you didn't fully clean it, which obviously are not the items we're wearing today, you could become impure. So if there was roadkill and there was a little bit of meat on the skin and you pulled off you wanted the skin of the animals, not kosher, you can't use it. Verse 40. I mean, it's impure. And what about if you eat it? You ate non-kosher meat. It wasn't ritually slaughtered. It was a kosher animal that had split hooves and chews its cud, like we learned yesterday. But you ate it. So Rashi says something very interesting here, an interesting law that sounds different. So if you touch it, we learned in the last verse, if you touch it, by touching it, you move it, you touch it, you become impure. You carry it. Somehow, someone put it in a backpack or something. You're not even carrying it directly. Indirectly, you're carrying it. It's in a backpack. You become impure. It's actually worse. Rashi explains, as I explained yesterday, that if you carry it, not just do you have to go to the mikveh, but your clothes has to go to the mikveh too. But what happens if you ate it without carrying it, without touching? How's that possible? If you ate something non-kosher, you picked up your hand and you put it in your non-kosher meat, you picked up your hand, or you put it in your mouth, you touched it and you carried it. So what happens if someone else fed you? Somebody said, look, I'm not going to move it. I'm not going to carry it. It's going to go straight in my mouth and I'm just going to swallow it. I believe that was actually a funny question, but someone actually asked that question yesterday. They asked, does a person impure if they just swallow it? And the actually very interesting, I think I said this yesterday, the answer is no. In a kosher animal that was slaughtered incorrectly, someone went hunting, they didn't do ritual slaughtering, and somebody else shoved a piece of meat. They were grilling, and your hands, sometimes your hands are all dirty. You said, stick that meat in my mouth. Somebody gave you a little piece of meat and you swallowed it. You will not become impure because you didn't touch it and you didn't carry it. Very interesting rule. However, if it's a kosher bird that died without ritual slaughter, then you will become impure from swallowing. So actually, depending on which item it is, will swallowing make you impure. Not if it's not correctly slaughtered. Now, non-kosher slaughtered meat, it won't make you impure from just swallowing it if you find a way of not touching it or not carrying it. But of course, in any case, touching and carrying will make you impure, and birds, even swallowing, will make you impure. Just interesting rules regarding it. We're almost done. Verse 40. The basics to understanding the laws of impurity. If you eat of their carcasses, then and you touched it and you carried it, you have to also wash your clothes. It's not enough for you just to go to the mikveh. Your clothes have to go to the mikveh too. The tummy ad the arvan, you're impure until the night. Again, the mikveh does not make you right away pure. You still got to wait till nightfall to become pure. Carrying it is worse than touching it. Because not just you have to go to the mikveh, your clothes also have to go to the mikveh. The tummy ad the arvan, and again, you're not right away pure by going to the mikveh. You still have to wait till the evening in order, even though you went to the mikveh. Let's continue on. Verse 41. All these creepy crawling bugs, non-kosher bugs, shakets hu lachem should be disgusting. Shakets hu layachli, you shouldn't eat it. It's disgusting. Abhorrent. A Jew should be abhorrent by the low creeping bugs. Remember I said yesterday, like bottom feeders. A Jew has a special mission. A Jew is not allowed to eat these stuff. You're not allowed to eat these little crawling bugs. It's prohibited. And you're going to see, we're going to stay tuned in a few minutes. Hashem's going to talk about us as we're his holy nation and we shouldn't contaminate ourselves. That's going to be in another few verses. But first of all, a Jew is not just impure. Again, you're not allowed to eat these things. Rashi brings an interesting case. You know how sometimes on fruit, inside the fruit, the bug maybe will be hatched. You know, they'll put their eggs in the fruit. So it never was in the ground. It didn't grow regularly. You already picked your apple. And somehow the eggs or the worms or the things came like out of the fruit. And you took a bite of the apple and you eat these things. There's bugs everywhere. Maybe, you know, these little tiny bugs. It's not prohibited. It's as long as it's still in the apple before it went out, you're not violating eating non-kosher by eating these little tiny bugs that sometimes grew in the apple, grew in the fruit, you didn't violate it by eating. Once the bug flew out and then flew back in, then you are in violation if you eat the fruit together with the bugs. Also, Rashi adds, not just is this a prohibition for you to eat it, it should not be eaten. You're also in violation if you give someone else to eat it. So if you're serving somebody items that have, you know, by the way, like we always check our lettuce for bugs. So you're not allowed to eat those. Those bugs flew, they didn't grow in the lettuce. They crawled around the ground, they flew into your lettuce, and it's actually a violation. You know, that's why you even if you go to a non-kosher restaurant where they don't check for bugs, you're in violation, or you just buy lettuce in the store, you must check your lettuce for bugs. Bugs are prohibited. This is a prohibition from this verse 41 here. You're not allowed to eat bugs. And therefore, a Jew checks his lettuce and these things that have bugs on them constantly, and in order to eat non-kosher, because the bugs are non-kosher. The bug grew in the lettuce originally and never flew out and never came out. And you ate it by mistake, and you ate it. It's not a violation. But if the bug flew in, it's prohibited. And not just are you prohibited because you ate it. If you give it to someone else to eat this lettuce with bugs, you are also in violation. So the prohibition is also when you're giving it to other people to eat. And what are these bugs? These are the little crawling things. Obviously, they're crawling on the ground. I think the intent is obvious. Verse 42, not just you're not allowed to eat bugs. Kol hoylech al gachain, anything that crawls on its belly. Snakes. We're going to see soon worms. There's also going to be a word in a moment, which we're going to learn. The chol hoylech al arba, or anything that walks on four. That is referring to a scorpion. They're not kosher. The chol hoylech al arba ad kama ad kol marbe raglayim. Even the things that have a lot of legs, that's talking about the centipede. And kol, Rashi says, is including even beetles. You're not allowed to eat them. The chol hasheretz, all creepy crawling things, like seichlum kishakatem, you're not allowed to eat them because they are abhorrent, disgusting to a Jew. They're abhorrent to a Jew. A Jew is not allowed to eat these things. They're bottom eaters, as they say. Eaters, you know, they're a Jewish neshama is not allowed to eat these things. Al tishaksu, now he's going to talk about this mitzvah as a whole. Al tishaksu es nafshei seichem. Don't make yourself disgusting. Don't make yourself abominable. Don't lower yourself down to this level. By eating all these bugs that are on the ground. It's gross. It's disgusting. It's not for a Jew. And you won't become impure by them. You will become impure if you eat them. And if you make yourself, Rashi says, impure in this world, God says, I will make you impure in the world to come and in the heavenly court. So by you think you're just physical here. No, this contamination of eating these non-kosher bugs will contaminate you physically here, but you will also end up contaminating your soul in the world to come and in the heavenly court. And then that you don't end up being contaminated by these bugs. And if you do, you'll end up being contaminated even in the world to come. Verse 44. Because I am God, your God. I am God, your God. What does that mean? I'm holy, and I want you to be holy, and I'm making you holy, and I'm holy, and therefore you need to be holy. Me and you have a special relationship. How can we have this relationship of me being holy and you being holy if you're eating bugs? This is not going to work. I'm holy. Ki ani Hashem, I am God. You are God. You need to be holy too. V'skadashtem, v'isem kedoshim, and I will make you holy in this world and the next world. Don't touch this stuff. Ki kadesh ani, because I'm holy. V'sitambos nafshesechem, and you will not violate this prohibition. And it's funny because there's like, we've learned this yesterday, this prohibition of eating these bugs. And now we're learning it again today. And the verse keeps on repeating it. And Rashi says here that it's adding you many violations. So it says, the Torah says so many times, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Depending on the animal, you could be violating 4 prohibitions for eating an ant, or 5 for eating a hornet. You could receive 6 lashes depending on the item that you eat. You cannot eat this stuff, and the Torah and God says it's abhorrent. God says, and it's in violation of many violations if you eat this stuff, because the Torah keeps on repeating it how Jews need to be holy and they cannot eat these bottom feeders. As you'll defile yourself for eating these crawly things that are on the ground. Verse 45. Ki ani Hashem, because I am God. Who took you out of Egypt. I removed you, I lifted you up from out of Egypt. He says that I took you out of Egypt, so you should keep my mitzvahs. Don't be doing this stuff. I took you out of there to keep my commandments. Why are you eating this gross, this stuff? And he says, I took you out from the lowliness of Egypt. It would have been worth it, even just for this seemingly little tiny mitzvah of don't eat gross bugs. Just by doing it, it was worth me taking out of Egypt. Even if this would be the only mitzvah I would give you, not to eat bugs and make you a holier nation, just for this thing alone, it would have been worth me taking you out of Egypt, Hashem says. And I'll be your God. You'll be holy, because I'm holy. And I guess this goes on the whole parsha, eating kosher and not eating bugs and becoming holy and purifying ourselves is very special and makes us some special holy nation. Verse 46 to sum up this whole week's third portion. This is the law of the animals, what's kosher, what's non-kosher, and the birds. We've covered all the rules, which animals you could eat, which animals you can't eat, which birds you could eat, which birds you can't eat. And all the live things in the water, we said, fins and scales is good. Everything else, seafood, no good. Or any soul that's on the ground, this is what you are allowed and not allowed to eat. And you should be very careful. Jewish people should be very careful to separate. You should know clearly. It shouldn't just be theoretical in Torah class and learning, as Rashi says. You should know exactly what's pure and what's not pure. Not just to know, as Rashi says, what's a donkey and what's a cow, because that's obvious. You have to know which one is shechted, slaughtered correctly, because when you slaughter it, you have to slaughter the windpipe and the esophagus. You can't just slaughter one. The Jewish people need to be specialists in understanding what makes an animal kosher, even in the complicated laws. It shouldn't be just theoretical. You should know exactly what makes a kosher animal. Between the wild animals and all the animals, the deer, and a donkey, not just between a deer and a donkey, to know the difference between the two of them. Between the things, an animal that's an unhealthy, sick animal, and you slaughter it, it's not kosher. If it's going to die, that's why they check. That's what glat kosher is, and so on. When they check the animal after it's slaughtered to make sure it was a healthy animal, you're not allowed to eat animals that are dying, that are sick, or that are going to die even within the year. You have to also be very careful and make sure that the animals are not treif, that they're not sick and dead animals. It's part of keeping kosher. And that's why Hashem took us out and made us his holy nation. And by keeping these mitzvahs, will be holy to God and will be God's holy nation. That's the end, my friends, of today's Chumash. Any questions or comments before we move on to today's Tanya? We got to do Tanya, even though we skipped yesterday because we saw